I want you to imagine that you're with the Israelites and Moses. You've come to the foot of Mount Sinai, this vast granite altar that's towering above. You see a thick cloud over the mountain and lightning flashing across the sky. You hear thunder ringing out and a very loud trumpet sound. Now Sinai is consumed in smoke because God in his awesome power has descended upon it in fire, and the whole mountain shakes violently. And then the voice of God roars out in Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 through 17. Now these words, spoken by God in Exodus 20, have become very famous. They constitute the best known law in any among the ancient civilizations, the 10 Commandments. Though they are the most recognized in the entire world, I believe they are also the least understood. For example, few in the religious world understand that the 10 Commandments were given to only the Old Testament Jews. Later in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1 to 5, then Moses summoned all Israel. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb, or Mount Sinai. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all those of us alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain. Now, centuries later, in Psalms 147, verse 19 and 20, it teaches the same truth. Now, a covenant is an agreement between parties, and it affects no others. The 10 Commandments was a testament between God and the Old Testament nation of Israel, and this written will involve no one else. Few in the religious world understand that it was a temporary law to be done away with. In Old Testament Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 and 32. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. Now this passage is found in Hebrews chapter 8. Now listen to Hebrews chapter 8, verse 7 and 8. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion sought for a second. For finding fault with them, he says, now that Jeremiah 31 passage is recorded in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8 and 12. So the question is, what was wrong with the first covenant, the law of Moses? Well, in Romans chapter 7, verse 14, it teaches it was holy and just and good. Yet Hebrews chapter 7, verse 18 states that it was weak and useless. Well, why then did we need a New Testament? Because the Old Testament could not bring man into a permanent fellowship with God. And with sin on Israel's part, it was destined to be abolished, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4. The 10 Commandments were the core of this old covenant that God made with the Hebrews when they left Egypt. Yet God said he is going to make a new covenant, not like the one or the first one. Few in the religious world understand that the 10 Commandments are invalid and no longer apply to us as a law. Now, in contrasting the old and the new covenant, Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7 and 8, "But if the ministry of death in letters engraved on stone," that's the Old Testament, "came with glory, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face, fading as it was, how shall the ministry of the Spirit," that's the New Testament, "fail to even be more glory?" Now notice verse 11 still in chapter 3. "For if that which fades away with glory," the Old Testament, "much more that which remains is in glory," the New Testament. "Engraved on stones," the Ten Commandments faded away, while the ministry of the Spirit, the New Testament, remains. According to Colossians chapter 2, verse 14 to 17, the Old Testament, including the Sabbath, was nailed to Christ's cross. Now in Hebrews chapter 9, 15 to 17, the New Testament goes into effect after the death of Christ. So Calvary marks the end of the Ten Commandments as a binding law, with a transition period of 50 days and the beginning of Christ's covenant or New Testament in Acts chapter 2. Now finally on this point, few in the religious world understand that today we must keep certain basic commands, but not because they were first found in the Old Testament. Listen carefully. 9 of the original 10 commandments have been brought over into the New Testament. 1 has not. Those, however, that have been repeated in the New Testament are not listed together as they were in the Old Testament, and are simply a part of the overall commands of Christ and his New Testament. Furthermore, each of the 9 commands that have been expanded to include more for the Christian in the New Testament age than they did for the Jew under the Old Testament dispensation. So let us take a closer examination of the 10 commandments, and especially how Jesus has applied 9 of them for us today. And remember, if anyone today keeps the 10 commandments only, they are still spiritually lost to hell. The 10 commandments naturally divide into 2 sections. The first 4 deal with man's relationship to God, and the last 6 with one's relationship to his fellow man. Now the Jews were able to summarize the 10 commandments into these 2 laws, as told by Jesus. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind." That's the first 4. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." That's the last 6. This is found in Matthew 22, verse 36 to 40. So now we begin in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. "You shall have no other gods before me." This commandment is not only in numerical sequence, but it's in order of importance. If one did not obey this first commandment, he would not keep the other 9 which follows. This was very significant lesson for a nation that kept a golden calf up its sleeve. Now notice the key to this command is found in the words, "before me." God had to be first in their affections and the only God to be worshipped. Now this warning has been repeated in the New Testament. When Satan tempted Jesus, Christ rebuked the devil, for it is written, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and serve him only. Matthew chapter 4, verse 10. Someone has said, whatever your hand clings to and relies upon, that is properly your God. And that's so true. A thing a person puts first in his or her life, that is their God. We never been before a calf of gold, but we still worship gold. We will never yield our knee before a graven image of Baal, but the inscribed image of a dollar bill we will fall head over heels to embrace. There are things that can be good in our life, but they are not God, or are they to be made into a God. So let us learn to keep them in their proper place. In Acts chapter 14, you find an example of this abuse in the city of Lystra. Paul and Barnabas were mistaken as gods by the crowd that wanted to offer sacrifice. But the apostles in verse 15 say, men, why are you doing these things? We are also of the same nature as you, and preach the gospel to you in order that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In the 21st century, this first commandment has value for us. Not because it was part of the Old Testament 10 Commandments, but because it is in principle, has been repeated for us on the pages of the New Testament. Second commandment is in Exodus 20, verse 4 and 5. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of that which is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath us, or in the sea under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. This commandment involves a threefold forbidding. Number one, do not make an image. Number two, do not bow down to an image. And number three, do not serve an image. Now you can see the wisdom in obeying the command because of at least three mistakes that I know would result in not doing so. The first, it would give a misrepresentation of God and his Son. You know, the Hollywood image of Jesus is this good-looking tan hunk of a He-Man. Long blonde hair with no split ends. Deep blue piercing eyes with pearly clean capped teeth sparkling in the sunlight. Wearing a white robe that never gets dirty and speaks perfect language in the King James Version. Do you not see the infinite wisdom of God and his Son, not posing for a Michelangelo sculpture or Olin Mills photograph? Because superstitious religious folks would carry around a picture of Jesus for protection, and they would erect shrines every place that Jesus dropped a tin can of sardines from the Sea of Galilee. Secondly, it would give humanity the idea that God is like us, an old wrinkled man with a long flowing white robe and beard, and he rather moves stiffly and slow with weak eyesight and is hard of hearing and has a feeble mind. This manner of thinking has produced most of the evil in our world. God made in man's image loses much of his power. Why obey the commands of a finite God that you can outrun in a foot race? Number three, making images would prevent spiritual growth. We would develop limited access to God. One only feels close to God where these images are located and would start placing too much emphasis upon a church building and have a warped sense of trust in these man-made icons. We want to walk by sight, but God decrees that we are to walk by faith, 2 Corinthians 5:7. So mankind is to comprehend God without idols. John 4:24 says God is spirit. Well, how do you make an image of a spirit? You cannot see or know how he looks. Our idols are completely worthless, as they do not represent God. This basic truth is repeated in the New Testament, yet some cling to their pagan ways in their so-called Christianity. 1 John 5:21, little children, guard yourselves from idols. This second command is of value for us, not because it was first a part of the Old Testament 10 Commandments, but because in principle it is found in the New Testament. Number 3 commandment is Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Our names are imperative to us, and the name of God is of the utmost importance to him. It is a declaration of his being and his character. In every real sense, his name stands for God himself. Psalms 111 verse 9, holy and awesome is his name. God's name represents him. Now, since his name is holy and awesome, it is an insult to God to so casually esteem his name in an irrelevant manner or a lack of respect. Leviticus 22 verse 32, and you shall not profane my holy name. The Old Testament scribes considered God's personal name too holy to repeat. After all, in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 11 and 16, one who blasphemed the name of God was to be stoned to death. So the scribes refused to utter his name in fear of taking it in vain. Therefore, they substituted the word Lord in the sacred text whenever God's personal name appeared. Today, our attitude towards God's name should remain as one of great respect. Jesus taught his disciples to pray, Father, hallowed or holy be thy name. Matthew 6, verse 9. Now, there are different ways in our culture that we can use God's name in vain or take it lightheartedly. By swearing. Vulgarity does not make you sound intelligent, but it takes from. Someone has said, profanity is the effort of a feeble mind to express itself forcefully. It is like the fella that didn't have anything to say, so he swore to be heard. Also, one can use personal gain or selfish purposes. That's another means of using God's name flippantly. The religion a Christian has who takes God's name in vain is empty and useless. James says in chapter 1, verse 26, if anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. You could add Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 to that thought. Man is the only creature of God that thinks so lightly of the very name of his Creator. I have never witnessed in the animal kingdom any lifting their furry paw towards heaven and growling obscenities to God. Have you? Only humanity who has been created in the image of God. And we blaspheme his name nonstop. This third commandment deals with our basic attitude towards God. It is of value for us today, not because it is part of the Old Testament 10 Commandments, but because it is a principle that has been repeated in the New Testament. Fourth commandment is Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Now the word Sabbath means rest. This was a day of rest that commemorated the Jewish deliverance from Egyptian bondage. They were instructed to do no work at all on that day. It was set aside for relaxing. Now Jesus had a lot of trouble with the Jewish religious leaders over Sabbath practices. And in the New Testament, there is no instruction for keeping the Sabbath. It was not brought over into the New Testament like the other 9 commandments were. Now, why is that? Because the Sabbath was a sign between God and Israel only, just given to the Jews as part of the Decalogue. Now listen to Exodus chapter 31, verse 12 and 13. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, But as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, You shall surely observe my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. And in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12, it also states that it was a sign between Israel and God. Now, a sign is a distinctive mark which distinguishes or sets apart. Now, how is it distinctive? If all mankind, from creation, Jew and Gentile alike, is to observe it, it simply would not be a sign in any shape or form. The plagues sent upon Egypt were signs of God's displeasure with Egypt. Miracles performed by Jesus were signs of his divinity, being the Son of God. Likewise, the Sabbath kept by one nation, Israel, was a sign that they alone were chosen by God during the Old Testament Messianic age. Listen up. Anyone binding the Sabbath on you is attempting to make you a Jew and making a law where God has made none. Because it is not in the New Testament as a commandment for the Lord's church. So these individuals are reviving. They are trying to give life to a dead law that was fulfilled by Jesus. Those who practice the Sabbath, most likely like such as Seventh-day Adventists, they desire to live under the Old Testament law. And they must accept the fact that they are wanting to be justified by it. And if so, you have severed yourself from Christ. You who are seeking to be justified by law, you have fallen from grace. Galatians 5, verse 4. In the New Testament, we are commanded to keep not the seventh day, the Saturday, but the first day of the week, Sunday. New Testament Christians assemble then to worship, to partake of the Lord's Supper, and give of their means. Were you aware that Sunday, the first day of the week, is very significant to New Testament Christianity? The resurrection of Jesus occurred early Sunday morning. The Lord's first appearances to his disciples took place later on the same day. Christ's church began or was established on this day in Acts chapter 2. In Leviticus 23, verse 9 to 11, Pentecost is 50 days after the high Sabbath following the Passover. Therefore, it's always on the first day of the week, Sunday. Forgiveness of sins with the gift of the Holy Spirit in Jesus' name was enjoyed for the first time. The New Testament covenant promised by God during the Old Testament period went into effect on Sunday as a day of worship for New Testament saints. This fourth commandment, written in the Old Testament, is never repeated in the New Testament as a command for the Church of Christ or individual Christians to observe religiously. Yet, if you want to chill out, sleep in on Saturday, go for it. Now, our last 6 commandments, as I mentioned earlier, deal with one's relationship to his fellow man. They have been repeated in the New Testament and enlarged upon. The 5th commandment is in Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. This commandment was designed to protect the home. In the New Testament is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 to 3. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise. Now here comes the promise. That it may be well with you, and you may live long in or on the land. The attitude of children towards parents is a test of their attitude towards God. Honor and respect for parents and God go together. The child who does not give honor and respect to their parents in the Lord, whom they have seen, cannot give honor and respect to their heavenly Father, whom they have not seen. One major reason for America's decay today is because of the foundation of the home. The family is crumbling into the dust due to a lack of honor and respect for parents. Now, some of this is the fault of mom and dad. 3 definite ideas are expressed in honoring our fathers and mothers. Number 1, as youngsters, it means obedience. What a needed lesson for an American age of rebellion. In the Old Testament, disobedience on the child's part would cost them their physical life by stoning. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18 to 21. Now, you know, out in front of my window of my study, there's some pretty good-sized stones there. But parents, I want you to please leave them alone. You go elsewhere and fetch your own rocks. Number 2, when older, it means living the right kind of life. When we fail to act as we should, being unfaithful to God is a negative reflection upon our parents rearing us. And thirdly, when as an adult, it now means caring for parents, providing mostly for their physical well-being. Children, young and old, honor your father and mother. 6th commandment, Exodus 20, verse 13. You shall not murder. This commandment was designed to protect human life. Murder is the most grievous sin against society. If you take a human life, it can never be replaced. Man's physical life, apart from his eternal soul, is his most precious possession. To wantonly take another's innocent life is violation of this fundamental principle. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. America murders the innocent in the womb, but we keep criminals alive in prison. Go figure. In the New Testament, it means more. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 and 22. You have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Now, according to 1 John chapter 3, verse 15, there are murderers in the New Testament church who have never shed the blood of another, and you might be sitting next to one or near one on the same area. That verse reads, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. Brethren, we can be a murderer and never shed a drop of human blood. So, not just committing the physical act of murder, but thinking about murder, but having hate in your heart for another will send souls to hell. The seventh commandment is in Exodus 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. This commandment was designed to protect the marriage relationship. In the New Testament, it has been magnified considerably. Today, we can commit adultery in at least 3 ways. First is the physical adultery. Now, this is what was referred to in the 7th commandment of Exodus 20, verse 14. Secondly is mental adultery. In Matthew 5, verse 27 and 28, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus forbid not only the physical act, but the lust, the thought that precedes it. Now thirdly is there's called legalized adultery. The marriage union of one or more divorced people who were not scripturally free to marry again. Matthew 19:19. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another commits adultery. Though legal in man's eyes by our twisted civil court system, it is not lawful in God's sight. Peter told the Jewish council, we must obey God rather than man or men. Acts 5, verse 29. The 8th commandment, Exodus 20, verse 15. You shall not steal was designed to protect property. There are many ways today that we can be guilty of stealing. You get back too much change, and then you don't call it to the attention of the cash register lady. Well, it's her tough luck if she cannot count. Cheating on our stock trade or taxes, charging high prices, or again, shortchanging someone. And all these scam artists who are preying on the elderly are stealing. Now, the following one, we old-timers are guilty. When using a payphone in the past, we checked to see if there were any coins in the slot. And if so, we took them, which is stealing because those rightly belong to the phone company. When putting that nickel, dime, or quarter in your pocket, did you say, finders keepers, losers weepers? In the New Testament, Ephesians 4, verse 28, let him who steals steal no longer, but rather let him labor, performing with his hands what is good, in order that he may have something to share with who has need. Not only are we not to steal, but we are to labor. And not only are we to toil, but we are to work to give others who are less fortunate aid. Instead of stealing to take for self, we are to make the effort to help others. The ninth commandment, Exodus 20, verse 16. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now this command was designed to protect the individual's reputation. Why so much emphasis upon a good reputation? Because it is one of man's most valuable possessions. Old Testament, Proverbs 22, verse 1. A good name is to be more desired than great riches. You know, it takes a lifetime to build a good reputation, but it can all be lost in a moment of some outrageous remark that is said about you. William Shakespeare wrote this. He said, "Who steals my purse steals trash, but he that flinches from me, my good name, robs me of that which not enriches him, but makes me poor indeed." Now there's several ways today that we can bear false witness. By perjury in court, misrepresentation, gossip, slander, to keep quiet instead of speaking in another's defense, and by asking shifty questions such as, are you sure that he or she can be trusted? You see, that places doubt on a good name. Bearing false witness is like mud that is thrown against a clean wall. It may not stick, but it leaves a mark. In the New Testament, 1 Peter 3, verse 10, for let him who means to love life and see good days, refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips from speaking deceit. Old Testament bear false witness is heightened in the New Testament Christianity with not just refraining from speaking evil and lies, but speaking the truth in love. Ephesians 4, verse 15. The Old Testament commandment could be obeyed by just keeping one's mouth shut. But the New Testament, however, dictates that we must say something, not falsehoods, but speak the truth in love. Brethren, we must express verbally all of God's truth. And finally, the 10th commandment. Now, are you not glad that we didn't have 15? Because this would be a long sermon. Now, according to Mel Gibson's movie, History of the World Part 1, he played Moses, coming down from Mount Sinai with 3 tablets, each having 5 laws. And he tells the people, God gave me 15. And then he drops 1 tablet. 10 commandments for all to obey. Now in Exodus 20, verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, or you should not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This commandment is designed to protect the individual himself. It guards one because covetousness produces many of the other sins that we've mentioned. Stealing, the adultery, taking somebody's wife, that's a form of stealing. Other gods before you, you want something. I mean, all of these things basically stem around this. So this commandment is rather unique in that most commandments sought to control the deeds. This one sought to regulate the heart. In the Old Testament refers to an excessive desire to have that which belongs to another. But in the New Testament, covetousness includes thinking too much of what is rightly ours. Listen to what Jesus says in Luke 12:15. Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. Living in a materialistic society, we get blinded by the luster of gold, and we can lose sight of the true values of life. Enslaved by the mad struggle of greed to get that which we shortly have to leave for someone else after we die, and that becomes that person's problem. Ephesians 5 verse 5, for this you know with certainty, that no covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. As said, this commandment was given to protect the individual himself, and sometimes to shield us from ourselves, so that we do not have all these sinful desires which are forbidden. And as the consequence that are ungodly of this greed, it followed by acts of meanness, injustice, oppression, and unkindness. We need to learn the valuable lesson that Peter was taught when Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus on the mountain. The fisherman, he's all excited. He says, I will make 3 tabernacles, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, having said that, Moses and Elijah, they vanish. And then a voice from above in a cloud says, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Hear him. That's Matthew 17, verse 4 and 5. We are not to listen to Moses, the great lawgiver of the 10 Commandments to Israel, or Elijah, the great prophet, urging Israel of his day to return to the 10 Commandments, but Jesus only and his New Testament message. The question is, have you obeyed his New Testament plan of salvation? Now, this is where it all begins. Everyone here who's old enough to comprehend what I've been talking about is old enough to believe, because you're accountable. So, if you've not obeyed that, first, the simple plan of salvation for the non-Christian, you need to do that through belief, repentance, and water immersion for the forgiveness of sins. So if you're subject to his call, and if you need to respond, come right now as together we stand.